So yeah, this was this video. This was this video that I was considering taking a look at, right? Because as I said, I'm cognizant of the lack of replayable content, if you will, in Endfield at the moment. But personally as well, again, I've got to admit, I'm incredibly biased when it comes to looking at Endfield stuff because I really like the game, and I'm cognizant of my bias. I understand it's there, and I get it, and I know it changes my opinion slightly. When if it was a game that I wasn't so much into, I'd potentially be maybe more critical of things about the game. But I'll try my best to be as objective as possible and put aside those personal perceptions and subjective opinions on the game. But I do definitely think, are we still a little bit too early to be looking at the end game and really be like, oh, it's a problem. There's a problem with the state of the game. I don't know if there necessarily is. I don't even know if this video is even saying this as well either. But I've seen a few videos going around recently where people are like, Endfield has a lack of content issue. I don't think it has a lack of content issue, but I think people want, because I think what it is now, if the only games you play are like Genshin, WoW, ZZZ, Star Rail, the new game that comes out tends to get the same treatment again and again and again, where people look at a game that's 3 years deep, 5 years deep, 6 years deep, whatever, and then go, that game's got all this, why doesn't this have it? And of course, the game is going to look a lot more vacuous and have less content when you compare it with something that's well established, right? But that doesn't mean you can't be critical of the game state. But I don't necessarily think Endfield at this point is massively lacking content, personally. Now, if in 6 months' time we still have this same loop of content that we're getting now, I'm going to have problems, right? I'm going to have problems because I want better endgame, personally. But obviously we're getting CC, and I'm hoping we get improvements on Edge Space and other content as well. But I'm curious to see what you guys think about this, because I think we're repeating cycles every time now. We're seeing it with NTE, we saw it with Endfield, we saw it with River a bit now, and I think we're going to see it with every big action RPG gacha that comes out, where we're just going through the same cycle every single time, when we've got to understand 1.0s and 1.1s and 1.2s of these games kind of follow the same path every single time, and then usually they are much better, right? Not always, but usually they are. So I'm still confident that Endfield is gonna be much better and much more fulfilling in certain regards, but I really don't think this game lacks content. If anything, when it came out, people were bitching that it's too much like a job. There's too much stuff to do. And I still think there's plenty to do. But I also do believe gacha gamers love to speedrun content and then look back and go, I got nothing to do. Because the developers have already spoke about that it takes them 6 months to create content that people can clear in a couple of days, right? And that's always going to be a problem. They're always going to be chasing that unless they have that sort of heavy grind replayable stuff that can be incredibly dry, and I think that just takes a while to get out as well anyway. But let's watch this video then, shall we? So this is from Official. I think we've watched a video from this person before. I think it might have been about WoW, I'm not too sure. So about Arknights Enfield's game site. Again, I've saw a few videos like this, so yeah, let's see what he's got to say.
So Arknights Endfield has just now hit its second half of 1.2, and with all the content being out now, I basically have nothing to do for the next 3 weeks. So I was thinking this would be a good time for us to sit down and have a chat about 1.2, as well as the entirety of Arknights Endfield and the game state, now that this patch has been out for quite some time. I think while 1.2 has undoubtedly introduced some really good things, I think that we also have reached a point where we definitely need to have a talk about how the game is being handled. Now, before we dive in,
Okay, alright, I'm interested, because I do think, again, I think the new game gets that treatment of, like, where's the content? But every other game goes through the same cycle now. Again, that's not to say that we can't have breakout games that do something different, but when it comes to content, much like most live service games, you have content that drops, you have a big bunch of content to get through, and then you tend to have a downtime, right, to the next big patch. MMOs tend to have a little bit more of a stretch of content, but you definitely do have front-loaded content and then a bit of a drop-off, and then there's bigger periods in between those content patches, so the content typically tends to stretch a bit more, and there's usually a bit more of it. But I think all live service games go through this cycle of content patch, lots of things to do, less things to do for the rest of the patch, and then new content update, right? Now, again, that pushes towards wanting really good replayable modes, right? That's what you want out of these sort of games at the end of the day. You know, not unlike things like integrated strategies or pick your favorite endgame, which you feel like you can keep coming back to. We need more of that. Like, I must admit, Umbre Monument, I actually find it really fun, but it's not that mode, right? And Etch Space kind of failed to be that mode as well. But I do believe we're going to get that mode. Well, I hope we're going to get that mode anyway.
I have to openly admit that
Happens
this
in MMOs
is
as well,
currently
yeah.
my second favorite gacha game on the market. But
Okay.
I will try to stay as unbiased as possible. So, starting off, some things that I mentioned in my initial 1.2 review, the story for me was a hit. I don't think Enfield's story so far is some super insanely good story that is...
I agree as well. I think 1.0 had its highs, but it also had lots of weaknesses. I think 1.1 was a marked improvement on 1.0, and I think 1.2 was another step up again. So I'm really positive about the direction that Enfield's taking regarding story, because it has just got better each patch, in my opinion. You might disagree, but I think 1.2 was actually really, really good in terms of like the 3D gacha games, the action gacha game. And that patch in terms of story and moments was like really highly rated if I compare it to the other games.
So incredible that my PC starts catching fire from how peak it is. But it has become decent enough where I don't want to skip it and feel like it's worth my time. Ultimately, that is something personal that everyone has to decide for themselves.
True.
But I do think that 1.2 is definitely an overall improvement story-wise in a lot of different areas. I
think that's a general consensus as well, right? I think the general consensus is that 1.2 was a drastic improvement.
Talk about some of the, in my opinion, very good things about 1.2, which is Umbre Monument. This iteration of Umbre Monument was very special due to it having double the stages.
I actually think this was a weaker Umbre Monument than the previous one. I like the quantity, and I hope we get that sort of quantity. But I think overall, I think it was weaker. There were some great stages, and I like what they're doing. I love that each Umbre Monument stage, is different. That, brilliant. I love the variety. Keep that up. I don't want it to become like a Tower of Adversity where it's just a new resistance, or, you know, it's a different boss, but it's pretty much the same thing again. It plays to the new character, so to speak. Now, I'm not saying there isn't going to be stuff that plays to the new character. Like, Zhuang cleared that stuff easy. Didn't even need to change my team, right? But I like the changes. I want them to keep doing that, because for me as well, I look at Umbre Monument and I look at what they're doing and in that survival stuff, and I'm like, I feel like a lot of this sort of stuff could be used in CC stages together with other stuff. So I'm really happy about that. But I think overall, I think it was probably a little bit weak. It wasn't bad, but I think it was a little bit weak. So I think the last Umbre Monument for me was really good, actually.
This Umbre Monument featured 3 stages which were centered around trash mobs, and 3 stages that are being centered around boss-like enemies. It's a major improvement from Umbre Monument.
Which one was it now? Was it stage 4 or stage 5? Was it 4? You know, the rock golem character, the rock angloy. That was probably the weakest one, because that was just like, there was nothing about that at all, really, that stood out. Again, I think this one was weaker overall, but I think all the other stages was better. I'd say that was probably the weakest one, personally.
And I hope that they keep this new concept moving forward. I find all stages greatly designed, with the exception of Tidal Grief. I think Tidal Grief is a horribly designed...
That's the one with the little slimes that go to the middle, right? I don't think that was horribly designed. I think that was just designed for you to like play around with, right? Either positioning, or people were using Ardelia, right, to just sustain through it, right? I think that was like, again, I look at that stage and I think, okay, I see what they're doing there. You throw that into like a contingency contract environment with other stuff going on. You've got some difficult mechanics then to be dealing with. You're getting ran over by a really hard boss. You're having to deal with some other stuff. You've got some crazy ads and mobs going on, and then you've got someone over there where mobs are not necessarily attacking you, but there's a stage mechanic, right? You don't deal with them at the same time. You've got a problem. So then it'll bring in stage control and all that sort of stuff, right? And positioning and this is when in future, if we do get like proper summoning characters and Trapmaster characters, well, they'll be really strong, and obviously CC characters as well.
Stage in a similar way to survive the gas from the first iteration of Umbre Monument. My issue is that there's no real strategy or freedom on these stages compared to the other ones. Tidal Grief is basically just a DPS check, with the only other strategy being heal stalling with characters like Adelia and just trying to tank through and cheese the stage mechanic.
I suppose, you know, if you break it down like that, but I do think, you know, you can tackle it in different ways from, I haven't tried, but just from playing it, I feel like you could, but I think the overall idea's kind of the same, at least, unless you're like trying to sustain through it anyway. But I like the idea that you can just kind of just go for the sustain, and that's kind of cool, that is.
I dislike these kind of
definitely
stages.
Does have,
I don't find
you know,
them fun. I don't find them
variation
really creative. I personally just find them bad design. All other
like, for
stages
me,
are great and offer you as a player a huge amount of freedom as to...
I see these stages because I want games to do this, right? Where sometimes they're just throwing stuff at the wall. It's not always going to stick, right? I want games to do that. Give me lots of ideas, even if like 50% of them are trash, because then we'll get golden ideas as well. And then maybe the trash ideas on their own, or the implementation, can potentially work in with other ideas as well. Because again, for me, I think the idea of this, I genuinely think some of these stages are test beds for contingency contract. I really do. I'm going to stand by that. I will not be surprised if you see some of these mechanics as part of some of the CC stages.
How you want to approach the stage, which is something that I really appreciate about Umbre Monument overall. The mode itself is obviously still way too easy. I first tried every stage with the exception of Tidal Grief, which took...
I think so, yeah. I think this Umbre Monument was much easier than the last one, personally. I cleared every stage first time apart from this one, where it was just... I wasn't ready. I was like, oh, okay, you know? And then I cleared it the second time, where the dude where you have to consume his stacks last time took me about 4 times to clear, and the fire dudes, I think they took me 2 times to clear. So this one definitely was easier. I don't necessarily think the Umbre Monument stages need to get harder. I'd like maybe an EX stage at the end, where it potentially, it's a harder stage of one of them, or it combines mechanics from a couple of the stages. I think I'd prefer that, because... for me, Umbre Monument doesn't need to be the hardest content. I like differing difficulties in endgame, I do. I like some stuff that's just different, and it's just a test bed. And I think Umbre Monument's a perfect place to have tests to try experiments out, but then potentially maybe having an end stage where that's the EX stage, where it's like, okay, we're going to throw some shit at you now. I'd be down for that, personally.
Me 2 attempts. My team is now fully maxed out. There's nothing I can do anymore to improve my team. The result is that as long as I play like I have at least 1 functioning brain half and I read the mechanics of the stage, it simply becomes a cakewalk because my damage is simply inherently too high. Umbre Monument is not endgame content. I would argue Umbre Monument is in the middle between what endgame content in Endfield should look like.
I agree with that. I agree with that. Again, I don't think endgame has to be the hard content all the time, and this could be considered endgame, but I don't necessarily look at it as endgame. At the minute, it is, because it's kind of all we've got, really, in terms of an update each patch where something new's added, right? That's the mode that you could argue is a bit more difficult than the rest of the content, outside of maybe trying to clear the boss stages in really low times. Other than that, there's not much else. So I suppose people are going to look at it as the end game content, because it's all we've got, right?
And casual content.
Bro, me max, right?
This does not mean that Umbre Monument is bad or anything like
but
that.
But at the same time, I do agree with Moose's point on that, right? That if you're going to get end game content, you shouldn't have to kind of nerf yourself to get a challenge, right? I think that's a fair statement. But again, I don't think Umbre Monument is necessarily that. If CC is 50% the difficulty of the original CC, people are going to stop moaning about difficult content in this game, right? They are, because they're going to play that and be like, fuck this shit, man. I hate it. So I'm not necessarily worried about that. Again, the way endgame in gacha games, for me, what I want to see a myriad. I want to see the really hard content, right? I want to see the really repeatable content, the sort of grind-worthy content. And I want the stuff there that's just kind of switch your brain off because you enjoy playing the game and you kind of just like going through the motions. I think there's a place for all of that in endgame because sometimes you kind of just want to play the game you're enjoying and do your thing and maybe even practice some certain things a little bit without the real difficulty, but also, you know, have them fight back to a degree to create that environment for you. Yeah, I'm okay with Umbre Monument the way it is. I honestly am. I would like more interesting mechanics that force me to engage with the mechanics and EX stages. But yeah, as long as we get other endgame content that's different, I'm fine with it.
Umbre Monument is very, very good and a healthy mode for the game. All we need is simply more content overall, and especially content that is more tailored towards veteran players that have already reached the end of their character progression. I know Contingency Contract is coming, and Contingency Contract is exactly what this game needs. The game in general just needs more content. Honkai Star Rail was a game that, for example, during patches like 3.2, had essentially zero content in the game. You would pull characters and not use them anywhere other than endgame. The game has since then improved a ton, and we now have a billion...
I think all games go through these gacha games, right? Specifically at the start, and they have those patches. Oh, man, who remembers, was it 1.2 in Wuthering Waves? Possibly one of the worst patches ever, in my opinion, in terms of, like, the 3D gacha games. What a fucking dross patch. There was literally... And you say there's nothing to do in Endfield. There was literally nothing to do. If you was caught up in the game, that was a long, dry, wank patch. But now some people, a lot of people would consider Wua is in an amazing state, right? So we do have to remember the games, live service games are fluid. It doesn't mean you can't criticize them. You know, it doesn't mean you can't criticize them. I wouldn't, like, you know, I think a lot of people say that when you talk about, well, it's a bit rough to compare this that's in this state compared to this state in terms of time. And people go, oh, we can't criticize the game. I'm not saying that, but I think sometimes you've got to look at the history of other games, see where they're at, and then at least attempt to give the game that credence and be like, okay, let's see what happens. It doesn't mean you can't criticize it as of now. That's true. But, every game's had it right where it's in that state where it's like, fuck, bro, there's really not much to do at the minute. But I don't think it's going to stay like that forever at all. And as somebody who's been taking my time, I've still got plenty of stuff to do in the game in terms of side missions and exploration. And I really like the exploration as well in this game. So I'm kind of happy the state it's in at the moment. But that doesn't mean I don't want better.
Of active content like Anomaly Arbitration.
We're certainly in a state, I wouldn't say amazing.
The new
people
Star
would though,
Wars
right?
Challenges coming up next patch. Despite HSR patches being long, you have a lot of different content that you can actively play during that and that get actively updated. At the same time, content like, for example, HSR's Currency Wars can get updated very, very easily without
Currency Wars,
the
is that... I can't remember which mode that is. Is that the one that almost looks like a card game type mode? I'm not too sure. Again, it's been a long time since I played Star Rail, so I'm not even sure, you know what I mean?
Us needing to change the mode or anything. They just need to add more content. And I do think that this is the game state that Endfield should be striving for, in my opinion. Yeah, that's the one. Where we end up with a ton of different and unique modes, so that even when we have slow and partially dry patches like this one, where we are now stuck with basically zero content for the next 3 weeks,
I suppose you could say it's a drier patch. I guess the way I've been pacing myself through the game, right, it doesn't feel like a dry patch for me. Great story patch, great character on the banner. The Umbre Monument was fine. I've still got plenty of stuff to do in the game though, so like it's when you're fully caught up with the gacha game, it's a different experience than when you've left yourself plenty of room to do side missions, exploration stuff, right? And you've been taking your time with the permanent content. You know, I still haven't finished Etch Space fully because, you know, my issues with Etch Space, but I plan to. So, like, if I'm at a point when I jump on Endfield and I'm like, oh, I don't really have much to do, I've got stuff to do because I haven't sped through the game. But that doesn't mean that you should play the way I play, right? Because some people really just want to hammer the game. But you have to understand, if you hammer a game, you are going to be at a point where you don't have much to do, and it doesn't matter which gacha game it is, you're going to be in that position. You are going to be in that position, right? It doesn't matter if it's Genshin, Star Rail, Arknights even. Arknights, though, just have such a breadth and quality of deep content. But even still, if you go hard enough, you're going to be out of content kind of quickly, right? That is just the very nature of these games. But yeah, I don't know. I think I'm just getting a different experience because I play the game differently, right? Which I'm well aware of.
Still have things that we can
I
do.
also believe as well, I'm not saying that Mephisto's saying this, he's talking about it'll be cool to see these varied, unique modes coming, right? But I think there's a lot of people out there who are like, that should be in the game right now. But then every other gacha game didn't have that either. Now, that's not to say it wouldn't be nice for gacha games to launch in that state. Of course it would be. But again, we've got to treat them the same when they're launched, right? And look back and be like, pretty much every gacha game was in that state. The game comes out, it either launches without an end game or with one, but there's not massive amounts of things to do. And then periodically, over the first 6 months to 12 months, you tend to get more added, right? And the end game becomes more fleshed out. I think every gacha game kind of goes through that mode, really. Now, that's not to say that some games don't release with better end game. Of course, that's a fact, right?
And challenge in the game. And it seems to me that Hypergriff thinks the same, as they are adding not only contingency contract, but also this other new game mode where you will only be able to use 2 characters instead of 4. That's like already 2 brand new modes in addition to Umbre Monument that could be active.
Also, make Edge Space great, please. Just turn it into a proper extraction mode, and I'd love it. I know a lot of people disagree with me on that, but I don't care. Make that a replayable, grindable extraction mode that actually has stakes. Fuck, I'll be on Endfield all day long.
We updated every second patch in order to give us more content. I would not worry too much about this aspect because Hypergriff is clearly working on it. But I think it's 100% fair to say that things are moving partially slow, and I hope that 1.3 will be a major improvement.
I don't think so, no. If we look back to 1.2 with Wuthering Waves, which a lot of people like to compare the game to, right? 1.2 was trash, but where's the game at now? Most people probably would have argued that at 1.2 we were in a rough state, right? But I am confident that we're going in the right direction. I don't know if I would say we're going too slow. Maybe you disagree. I think it's moving at a fine pace, personally. Honestly, I do. I honestly do. We're at 1.2, right? We've got 2 permanent modes. They're not the most fleshed out. Fair. But the game still has a lot of content. And again, it is a gacha game. Events drop, patches drop, and if you hammer the game hard for a couple of days, you're probably going to burn through most of it, right? And then have to wait for the part way through the patch or the next patch to really get a good amount of content.
In terms of content for the game, I think Wuling's Super Chef and the Space Etching event, they're just simple filler events. There's no real substance behind them that we can talk about. They're just super simple daily filler events whose only purpose is to artificially increase the amount of events in the patch, but they...
I agree in that sense, but I also think they're there for people who enjoy the world as well, right? You know, if you didn't play Arknights, you wouldn't have got the nice Easter egg that when you're on the ship and you go to the window and the Long Trail music starts playing. Most people wouldn't even think about that, but everybody who's played Arknights and enjoyed Long Trail, that music hits and you're like, oh, fuck, shit. That's the sort of little tweaks that add a little bit of world building. And of course, you wouldn't want them over really good stuff, but I think as additional side pieces for me, as little side dishes, I'm fine with them, and I actually actively enjoy it when games do that, even if it's just throwaway. As long as it's not replacing genuine content, extra throwaway stuff for me is fine.
Had essentially 0 content to the patch itself. Every game has them, it's nothing really noteworthy. And lastly, I personally want to also talk about the factory situation. So first of all, I'm a what I would call...
To be honest, I don't want a gacha game to become a second job. If I can clear the patch in a week, fine by me. Exactly. And overall, gacha games are pretty much designed in that way, right? I am the type of person that I would definitely like more repeatable content in these games, but it's about finding that middle ground, right, where it's enough content for somebody who just wants to, as you say, you know, get their fill for the patch and then come back when it gets an update again and go play other games. And then for somebody like me, there's that little bit of, I get that slow burn because I take that content slower, but I've got that repeatable content as well. Yeah, I think, you know, it's just the way it is, right? That's how the industry is, and it suits a lot of people as well.
Average Endfield player. I like the factory building, but if you were to ask me, it would not be my favorite aspect of the game by a long shot. I enjoy...
I like the factory. I think it's what's really unique about this game, and it is fun to tinker with the factory. I'm not a factory min-maxer though. Like, there's a lot of people in my Discord who are. If I'm struggling something with the factory, right, and I'm getting a little bit, especially if it's for something I need, right, more so something that is potentially a count progression. If I have to, I'll just get a blueprint and then I'll tweak it and then I'll be like, oh, okay. And then I end up building out off my own when I feel like it. I'm kind of that person. The blueprints were perfect for me. They haven't stopped me engaging with the factory at all, but they have, it's a quality of life for me, you know, because fundamentally my two favourite things in Endfield is the combat and the exploration. Hands down, the things I love. It's why I'm so excited about new areas every time they come to the game. And I can't wait till we see more new areas, because walking around and exploring this game is such a pleasure. It's an absolute pleasure. And yeah, I'd probably say maybe the exploration is my favourite part, but I really like the combat as well.
Both the exploration as well as the combat way more. And so as a player like that, I have to say that I think this patch went a bit overboard with the factory building aspect.
As somebody who, again, who isn't the factory connoisseur, I'm glad it did, and I hope it continues to do, because it's a core element of the game, and I don't want the game to stretch away from me, because I think we could have some really cool stuff that I probably would be a massive fan of. And also, if I'm on the game and I'm feeling like I want to do something different, but I want to be on this game, the factory's perfect for that. So yeah, I continue to hope. I hope they continue to stick with keeping the factory as an actual important part of the game. Personally, I know that'll upset some people because they hate it, but yeah, I think it's a real core component of the game, and it's what makes the game unique as well.
Starting off, we got Arknights and the expanded Crucible, an even more complicated and more tedious to set up material than, for example, Shurikon, as well as giving us access to a total of 8 Forges of the Sky. The result of that was us being a...
I think, you know what I'd like to see? Give us more pipeline, you know, in terms of how much I can use, because hitting that limit can be a bitch. It's already happened to Smug Slav, yeah. It's happened to me when I've been getting a little bit too carried away. And I do like the idea that sometimes you push to be efficient with stuff, but I don't know if that's to keeping the game running well design choice, or it's just literally for that exact reason, as I've just said.
Eventually forced to scrap our factory
Fix these more pipes
and build a brand new one for 1.2. As people have already commented on my previous videos, we get introduced to Shuriknight in 1.0 with Shuriknight components. Then in 1.1 they instantly add cuprium with cuprium components, which results in us needing to basically scrap our entire factory in order to make a new one for 1.1.
I think this sort of stuff, though, it's sort of somewhat important. Now, could they do better? I don't know. I'm not the factory expert, right? But I think it's somewhat sort of important to keep the factory necessary, because a lot of people were like, well, after launch, I'm going to build my factory and then set it and forget it. What the fuck's the point after that? Well, that's the point. You get to a new area, there's a new component, you have to build that to progress. It's going to be the thing, right? I do hope they come up with new ways to build, whether that's potentially like a vertical sense, new ways to do things, new efficiency stuff. But yeah, I think it's kind of needed, right, to keep the factory being iterative to a degree. Could it be done better? Probably. But again, I'm not the factory expert. When it comes to the factory stuff, I treat it a lot more casual than the rest of the game. Like everything's done. I'm producing all my gear, all the stuff I need to build stuff. But at the same time, I'm not that person who's looking at my output and being like, okay, I'm min-maxed to fuck yeah, perfect. I'm using the minimum amount of power for the maximum output. I'm able to get certain materials in and output certain materials at a much better rate. And that's great for the people who want to do that as well. I think they found a pretty decent balance for me for the factory. If you don't care about the factory, you don't have to spend a long time engaging with it. You really don't. Just go on YouTube, get some really good blueprints and stick them in your factory area and you're good to go. You might spend, I don't know, half an hour on the factory, each patch. If you just wait for somebody to drop some good blueprints, you might have to do the initial little thing to get certain materials to then provide you something that you need to do the rest of the blueprint. But yeah, I think it's in a good spot. There's a part of it for people who really want to play around with it, but then there's a real kind of chill part for the people who don't care about it. I think they did quite a decent job of balancing it personally.
And now we get Hatternite with Hatternite components, which requires us to set up another new factory. And then for the second half now, they add a...
Problem comes if the factory gets too complicated, the majority can't really interact with it anymore. There is that worry. This is why blueprints came in, right? And this was a worry why some people like Tolbro had the worry that, well, introducing blueprints now, people aren't going to interact with it because they're going to be encouraged not to interact with it. I think by its very design, some people are just not going to be interested in the factory, are they? It's just a part of the game. It's like Arknights being a tower defense game. Some people are just not going to fuck with it because it's tower defense. The same way a turn-based game, right? I think it's just a core design element of the game. Some people are just not gonna fuck with. They're just not gonna fuck with. Even down to a blueprint level, they're like, yeah, not for me. But I think the blueprints do a really good job of solving these issues for the people who really don't want to interact with it, but they really like the game.
Another 4 Forges of the Sky, which depending on your factory layout, might require you to scrap everything and come up with a new one. And I do believe it's fair to say that if you are a player like me who enjoys the factory building, but is not that super into it, this can slowly become more and more tedious. I will not say I'm anywhere near like burning out.
Again, that's what I say. The blueprints are perfect for that situation. Feeling a bit burnt out with the factory. Like I say, been there. Majority of my factory was my own build. If you look at my factory now, I've took some blueprint stuff, right? Because I was at the point where I was like, damn, bro, I'm just not producing these things efficiently. And I honestly don't want to spend time tweaking at the moment. Like, with certain things I have, right? Certain stuff's my own, I've tweaked with stuff. I've took blueprints, I've tweaked them. But then when I do feel that sort of thing, I just want to get on with something. I want to build this thing and move on because I really want to do this with a character, especially when it's a new character drops and gears attached to it. Fuck it, man. Blueprint. Just do it. Just do it, man. You know what I mean? It's perfect for that frustration wall. Hit that wall. Whip out the blueprints.
From factory updates or something like that, but it would be disingenuous of me to not say that it does slowly start becoming more and more tedious. They also did the first AIC factory event, but I think they handled that one as well as possible by giving players
I'll be truthful.
who really liked.
Haven't done that event, but I'm fine with that. I'm fine with it. Has the event finished yet? I don't even know, actually. I really haven't paid attention to that event at all, because I'm at the point where I was like, I don't know if I really want to mess around with it, honestly, but that's the beauty of it, right? Again, if you do, you just whip out the blueprint and put it all back together. Sorted. You know, if you're worried about that, if you're actually worried about ruining stuff, it's done, you know? Event's done. Tourist moments, man. True.
The Shiranite Jade God, which has a way more complex crafting recipe and might require you to reshape your factory, while giving players who don't like factory building the simple option of just crafting normal Shiranite gods, which are very easy to craft and require you to only turn off your heavy Shiranite production, and it doesn't even take up a lot of space. So that in the end, both factory fans and people who dislike the factory building or, you know, are just very neutral on it can get all the rewards without many issues. I will say,
I think,
and this is my...
Again, I think they've done a really good job at balancing the factory. I
personal
really
opinion
do.
now. I think that one of the reasons why players partially feel overwhelmed by the factory updates is because that was the most of the 1.2 content. Edge Space Salvage is super casual content that can be cleared in 20 minutes. An Umbre Monument is fun, but if you have been playing since 1.0, it should be too easy by now. And after that, you are pretty much just left with map exploration and factory building. I believe people would feel less overwhelmed or tired of factory updates if they had actual long-lasting combat content that they can spend time on, similar to...
I think that's a fair point. But I also do believe people just get burnt out with it because factory doesn't interest them that much, right? The very nature of base building and factory type games, they're kind of designed for the min-max, the person who's willing to sit there for a few hours and fiddle with something just to get it just right. Not everybody's like that, right? And it doesn't matter how much other content the game's got, you're still going to find that a frustrating bottleneck for your experience. But he's not wrong that, you know, if there was other content, you know, you can take a break, let me go do that, let me come back. Yeah, it's a fair point.
How I, for example, don't feel tired of HSR minigame events anymore, since I'm also getting anomaly arbitration updates, currency wars updates, and divergent universe updates all the time.
Variety is the spice of life, right?
My opinion is that this fatigue that some players are feeling from all the factory updates will slowly cease to exist the more non-factory returning or permanent gameplay content this game gets.
I don't know about that. Again, some people just don't like the factory element. It doesn't matter. They see that as shit, right? You know what I mean? They see that as shit. It's like putting that shit on a nice fucking dessert. It's still going to be shit to them. They can attempt to eat around it, but when they have to dip into it, they're still not going to like it, right? I'm not saying he's not wrong in the sense that when you've got more other stuff to do, if you do feel a bit of frustration and you want to continue to play the game, you can go do something else. Granted. I think that's a fair point, but I think some people are just it's a bit of a wall for them. The factory content is right, and that's understandable. Factory type games are not for everybody, and you know what? That's why they're created blueprints, right? For the most part, end of the day, it's why they're there, and it's why I don't understand why people were so angry with them. Again, you know, when Tolbrew first said it could be a slippery slope of making people not engage with it, they were the people that were just not going to engage with it anyway and would stop the game, playing the game, because of that disengagement. And some people were like, good. I disagree with that. You know, there's a great game here. Just because you don't like the factory, I like the fact that they've given you the tools to avoid that frustration. It's the perfect balance for me.
And now, before we end things, I want to talk about one last big thing that in my opinion is absolutely hurting Endfield at the moment. Leaks. Or in better words, the lack of leaks. Leaks are bad, but they are necessary. This was an opinion that I had for a very long time, and now with Endfield, I 100% believe that. Basically, when I say leaks, I don't think of story leaks or enemy leaks that spoil the
Unit
story
leaks.
and potentially ruin the content of the upcoming patch, but I'm talking about playable character leaks as well as their beta.
I'm assuming he's talking about like operator leaks in regards to keeping the hype up. Of course, that sort of stuff can generate hype, or it takes away from big reveals. I think this is just a thing. If you want, you need to be excited for the next patch, and you need to be excited for the next patch right now, maybe, but not for me. I think the only thing you can argue with, where you can consider leaks of positives, I suppose, for some people, is in effect like a clairvoyance, right? Where it's like, well, I can plan for a character, but for the company and for the hype of events, it's much better. And I think it's great to see for once that we've got a game that's not getting leaked all the time. Like, look at the Wooer community at the minute. They're kind of in a shambles of thinking, man, the leakers have ruined the Cyberpunk update for them, you know? And somewhat true, right? You know, that you don't get that excitement of, oh, shit. Now, to be fair, when it comes to it, Hyperglyph are good at leaking themselves, because fuck me, the last live stream, they were spoiling the shit out of, like, dudes, shut the fuck up, man. Stop. Just stop. You're telling us too much. So, yeah, we don't need anybody else leaking to us either.
Tests. And for that, let me yet again bring up my favorite gacha game, Honkai Star Rail. Honkai Star Rail has a thriving leak community, and we get to see the newest upcoming character in their entirety, as well as the changes they go through. And these beta tests, they can definitely be very emotional. It's thrilling to see a character you like get buffed or completely gutted to the point where it feels like part of the game itself. I know what Morten X Blade does. I have been through the beta of that character. I am...
This is just an individual preference. I can't really argue this because some people feel like that, right? I don't really care about that stuff, so yeah.
excited for that character and therefore their next patch. Despite the current patch having no content anymore, the sheer amount of replayable and also hard content game modes, as well as the anticipation of following the next upcoming character, and then also being able to pre-farm for that character and theory craft is
again,
in itself.
I think for me, maxes, yeah. I honestly, if it came down to leaks, I'd rather just know about potential endgame modes, if I'm honest, and maybe tweaks and changes to endgame modes. But yeah, I don't really care, because for me, we live in such a world now where nothing's novel, right? I said this in the Sunol video that I recorded, Jesse, which I don't know if I'm going to upload, where the way we do games now is we get trailers, another trailer, pre-alpha, alpha, closed beta, open beta, second open beta, pre-launch test, hundreds of thousands of videos from content creators who've been playing the game for 6 months. Then the game launches and you're like, dude, I feel like I've played this game for 50 hours already. Where back in the day, a game had just come out of nowhere and you'd be like, holy shit, this is awesome. It's why it's really nice and fresh when you get games that just come out of nowhere nowadays and you don't hear about them and you're like, fuck, this is amazing. And it adds to the experience for me. So like, considering we live in that world now where nothing's kind of not spoiled and nothing's novel, I honestly don't mind personally, but I understand people having a different view. I think this is just a personal take, and obviously you're saying that, but I'm just saying, I can't argue with this. It's just, it is what it is, right?
Content for the game. And then tomorrow you have the 4.4 drip marketing coming up. So you are suddenly already hyped for 4.4 and the 4.4 beta. The point is, these kind of leaks are absolutely content, and there are times when subreddits like HSR Leaks have more engagement than the main sub. And then your favorite HSR content creator, who for sure did not take a single peek at the leaks, is also bringing out a pre-release guide.
That's true. You get so many content creators do that, right? I ain't looked at the leaks. If this happens to be correct, wow. It's like, okay, Bucko, we know what you've been doing. You don't need to hide it.
From the content creator server 1 week before the patch drops. Endfield has absolutely none of that. There are 0 leaks, 0 marketing, and who would have guessed, 0 guides when the newest character drops. The game just feels dead with the lack of leaks. You are currently stuck for 3 more weeks in 1.2 with nothing to do. No news on the new patch that you can be excited about. Nothing to pre-build. Just nothing. You wait till the live stream, get all information dumped instantly onto you, and then shortly after that get the patch. And I 100% believe that this is also hurting the game a lot with the slow improvement rate and like...
Maybe. I think that's a fair point to say, that potentially it could generate more hype, right? It maybe the streams being brought forward, or potentially drip marketing being improved by Hypergrip. I think there's an argument to be said there, right? I think some companies do drip marketing much better than others. I think those little incremental posts from companies do really get things hyped up. I think I'd rather that than the game to be having massive leaks all the time. I don't, because listen, you know what happens. You get leaks from stuff like that. Guess what else you're getting leaks for? The story's getting spoiled, right? It just happens. You don't get one without the other. It happens.
Of content. And don't get me wrong, leaks suck. They do. I think leaks need to be eradicated, especially when I look at the amount of...
Okay. Wait, so we want leaks to be there because it makes the game hype, but let's get rid of them. Let's give him a moment. I think he's landing here.
Times where actually big community outrage had been caused by unreliable fake leaks.
Yep.
I believe that
And sometimes real, when characters get nerfed into the ground compared to what they were as well. People get angry about that.
leaks should be killed off, and things like character betas for the upcoming patch should be official content that everyone should have access to in a similar way certain competitive games do.
Okay, so basically, he's contradicting himself, but I think he's saying what I just said. Instead of you getting that information fed through leaks, it'd be nice if the company drip marketed in a specific way, I guess, which, as I said, I agree with that. I don't agree that leaks are great for hype, but then we should get rid of them. But I think, which they could be, right? But I think maybe Hypergriff could improve on drip marketing. I don't know if I necessarily need every change to all the kits to continue to make videos on. But yeah, I think they could improve on drip marketing. You know, I think they could.
Example being League of Legends, which has a so-called PvE server that has all the content of the upcoming patch on it, and technically every player can get access to that server and try things out, like, for example, the newest upcoming character. That would be insanely...
That sort of stuff makes a bit more sense when it's a PvP game though, right?
Healthy for the game, and at the same time help a lot with content issues. I also firmly believe that gacha developers should in general do patch roadmaps where they actively talk in advance about the upcoming content and characters of the year. I'm saying that as someone who used to play a lot of...
I don't know, you're at a point there as a player, clairvoyance is nice, but can it ruin hype? Can it cause bad sales? Yeah, you've got to look at the business standpoint. If they give you the next 8 characters that are coming out, then you can go, sound, I'm ignoring 5 of them, and I'm getting that one. You know what I mean? So they got to balance that right. They need to keep you hyped for every character, really, even if it's not the best unit as well.
Old gacha games, like for example Dragon Ball Dokkan Battle, where you had a JP or CN version.
We do kind of have patch roadmaps, don't we? We have the patch framework, don't we?
As a global player, were also knowing what was coming up in the following year. I get that gacha developers like Hoyo, Kuro, Hypergriff, whatever, are insanely greedy and want you to know as little as possible about the upcoming patch and the upcoming content to be able to induce as much FOMO as possible into you as a casual consumer. But from a raw content and game state perspective, this kind of secrecy is absolutely hurting the health of the game, and I think Endfield with its zero leak policy is just a really good example of it. Ultimately, the game is improving, but it's very slow. Whether you think it's worth sticking with the game because you know it will only get better, or you want to drop the game because you don't want to stick with a game that needs a lot of time to reach a satisfying game state, is in my opinion preference, and up to every player as both viewpoints are understandable.
Yeah. So, depends on how much fun you're having with it in this state as well, right? But again, I think I disagree with that it's been slow, personally. But I don't know. Again, you know, people's perception at times entirely individual, right?
In totality, when you sit down,
we are only on 1.2.
Most of the current issues of Endfield can be solved and summed up with Endfield needs more permanent gameplay content, especially since they clearly had no...
Yep, true. I think we still have time for that though. But yeah, true.
No idea what they were doing with Edge Space Salvage. I think Endfield has a ton of potential.
He's kind of right about that though, right? You know, Edge Space has so much potential and it's just unfounded. So yeah, I do think that the idea's there, but the implementation just didn't land, did he? It just didn't.
Potential, and I do believe that the game will be genuinely incredible by the time we hit the first anniversary, simply because the devs seem to clearly know the shortcomings of the game and are working on them, although very slowly. And with that, I think I have said everything I wanted to say about this patch, as well as the current game state of Endfield. Let me know what your thoughts on the current state.
Okay, so, current state, I disagree with this idea that it's very slowly. Again, that's a preference of what you expect from a developer. But I think if you compare it to 1.2s in Genshin, Wua, Star Rail, ZZZ. I don't think the game's drastically behind those games. ZZZ, I think, was in a decent state. Star Rail was in a pretty decent state, if I remember right. But I think both Genshin and Wua, especially Wua, the fucking 1.2 was dross. Now, I'm not saying that you should look to the worst patches and be like, well, it's better than that. That's a fair statement, but this idea that it's slow, I kind of got to push back on that. I don't think it necessarily is. I think it's kind of on path and on time to your average gacha game of this size, personally. And I think 1.2 was a pretty good patch, if I'm honest. It was a story patch, 1.2 was. And that doesn't mean you can't expect other stuff, because I know there was a big hoo-ha with that with Wuthering Waves, right, where people were like, well, I'm happy having no combat events for like 100 and some odd days, because the story is what matters. Story is important, but also other content is as well. And I hope we don't have something like that. But I also think the game, I feel like it's on time. I feel like it's on time, personally. I think the problem is all the other games in the space outside this and NT at the mini are established, and people look at that and go, you know, my rose-tinted glasses tell me the other games were in a much better state than this was at that point, which we all know is just not the case, right? If you're there on launch, and specifically for me, as somebody who was daily player of Wuthering Waves, 1.2 was rough, man. It was so hot, and as somebody who was streaming it daily then, I was lost, man. I was like, what the fuck am I supposed to be doing here? That trashy fucking festival, and the good thing we got out of that was the free character, right? But other than that, that was one of the worst patches that I've ever played in a gacha game, because it was just, there was nothing to do, literally. But I don't think we're at that point with Endfield at the moment. I personally think we're in a decent state. I would like more permanent endgame modes. I would like more repeatable stuff. I would like more difficult stuff, and not just difficulty doesn't have to be just harder, just different as well. I'm not here just saying everything needs to be like CC levels. I don't think it does, but I would like some different stuff, definitely. I agree with that. I think we've got plenty of time. I think we got plenty of time, personally. But yeah, I'd love to know what you guys think. I agree with a lot of points in this video and where he's coming from, but I also disagree quite a lot with the time frame. I think we're on track, personally. I think we're on track. But guys, check out Mephisto. He makes good videos. I think we watched it. I think it was a Wua combat video. I think he was pretty much on point with the Wua combat video, to be fair. I think he made a lot of good points in this video as well. But yeah, gotta disagree with some. Alright then, guys, should we jump into some Limbus? Should we play some Limbus, boys? Let's play some fucking Limbus. Let's do it.